Hello, thank you.
Welcome, everybody. I first would have to notify everybody that this is a recorded session. Thank you very much for your patience. It took us a little longer to get started. Some technical difficulties, but we pushed forward. Good evening. My name is Kara Bryant, and I am the chair of the Social Action Committee for Nassau Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. On behalf of myself and my co-chairs, Nancy Manigat and Naima Smith, as well as our entire committee, thank you for joining us on our Social Action Symposium webinar series, You Count, So Be Counted, Census 2020. Many within our community are unaware of the numerous ways in which the census count impacts our day-to-day lives. Our goal is to raise that awareness and paint a clear picture of the reasons why it is so crucial that we are all counted. Now, I would like to present the president of Nassau Alumni Chapter, Ms. Jackie Morrison Brailsford, to bring you greetings. So, President.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bryant. Hello, I am the proud president of Nassau Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring greetings to you all on behalf of the 192 members of the chapter. Those of you who may not know, Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated is a public service organization founded on Christian principles with a primary focus on the Black community. It was founded on the campus of Howard University on January 13, 1913, by 22 courageous collegiate women. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join us for our fourth session and final session of You Count, So Be Counted, Census 2020 Social Action Symposium. And a special thank you to our guest panelists. Blessings to you all and continue to stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. I would now like to welcome Ms. Kirandi Branch to open us in prayer. Kirandi.
Good evening. Let us pray. Father God, our provider, our continued source of strength, we thank you for the past 3 weeks of vital discussions that are leading to impact the census count within our communities. Lord, we ask that your blessings be upon us this evening. We ask that you be in the midst of this symposium. Be with our guest panelists, Nassau Alumni Chapter, Social Action Committee, and our president. Allow the panelists' words to enlighten us as we seek for answers to funding for our public schools. Create in us an open mind that will impact our actions for education in our communities. We need you, dear Lord, to help us fight what sometimes seems unattainable. We will continue to give your name the praise. We ask all of these things in the precious name of Jesus, whom we call the Christ. Amen.
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 Amen. I would now like to introduce our speakers for week 4, Why Our Count Must Count, Overcoming COVID-19's Impact on Education. Ms. Regina Armstrong, Interim Superintendent of Schools, Hempstead Union Free School District. Ms. Michelle Van Eyck, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, Roosevelt Union Free School District, and member, Nassau Alumni Chapter. And Mr. Sanjay Mitchell, Director of College and Alumni Program at Thurgood Marshall Academy, Public Charter High School, Washington, D.C. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat. It will be monitored as we go forward. And I would now like to turn the program over to tonight's moderator, member of the Social Action Committee, Ms. Sharice Vandehall.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So you may not know, but the last 3 weeks, the Social Action Committee has held a number of panel discussions on Wednesdays. The first was on COVID-19 and its impact on the Black community. The second week, the panel was on the Black church and COVID-19's effect on the Black church and its clergy. Last week, we held a panel discussion that was very lively on economic issues related to COVID-19 and its impact on our communities. So tonight, how else would we end tonight's symposium with a discussion on education, the coronavirus's impact on the gap, whether it's widening, because let's face it, right? Today's education gap is going to become tomorrow's economic gap. So we have the 3 esteemed panelists that Keira Bryant just introduced to the group. Thank you for being here. I'd like our conversation to just flow organically, so please do not hold back. We welcome all comments, especially the salacious ones. My first question is really for Ms. Van Eyken, Michelle Van Eyken. So just repeat, what's your title with the Roosevelt Union Free School District again?
I currently serve as the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction.
Okay, perfect. So New York State's been on pause now for over 2 months. Our children have been interacting with their teachers via remote learning on a variety of different platforms, whether it be Google Classroom, Zoom, WebEx, is it Dojo? Am I saying that right? A Doho?
Yes.
Okay, all right. How has access to technology in our communities affected the ability for our students to have a quality education during this time?
I would say the access to technology has played a major role because in communities like, Roosevelt and Hempstead and Freeport, we may not have the technology in bulk like other districts may have. We do have technology in the buildings, but now we've had to shift to sharing out those same devices to homes. We've been able to give out over 1,000 devices, but they're devices that, came from carts in our buildings, et cetera. So access has been limited. Access has been a stumbling block at times, but we've been able to manage and meet the needs of our students, I believe.
So other than providing laptops or iPads, are there any other things that districts have done to make sure that their students have the access that's necessary?
So we've been fortunate. We have recently partnered with T-Mobile, and we were given 1,000 hotspots or MiFi devices, they're called. So as we gave out laptops and iPads to students, we were also able to give students a MiFi device. Small device, looks like an old beeper style device, and they can, the whole family in the household can connect via this device. So we've been able to hand both of those items out to students as the need arose.
Okay, excellent. And just from your experience, what's been the difference between some of the wealthier districts and the disenfranchised districts on Long Island?
So when you think about a disenfranchised district like ours, we don't have a one-to-one initiative 100%. Right now we say we have 4th grade students or 5th grade students, different grade levels or different pockets of students that have a device in their classrooms all day, every day. In other districts, devices and technology are not an issue. There's a device for every student. They've been doing one-to-one as their norm. There's not a need to go out and scramble and find things like the partnership with T-Mobile. There's not a need to go out and move monies around to purchase devices to ensure that every student and every family has a device. So a district like ours, our needs and our priorities are very different than some of our counterparts in the affluent areas of Nassau County and Long Island. Their
Right.
issues are not the same as ours. They're just not.
Okay. All right. So I have to ask, if your budget was different, if your pockets were different, what are some of the additional programs and resources that you would incorporate? How would you enhance distance learning?
There are a million things that I would love to do and we could do. The first thing would be a device for every single student. I mean, we have families of 4 and 5 children that came to get devices, and maybe we were only able to give them 2 or 3. So now you have older siblings dominating the device all day, and the younger children may be doing homework well after their teachers expected it. You may have parents sharing a device for their jobs, etc. So the first thing I would do is make sure every student in the district had their own device. And I'd love to have one at home and one in school when we do return, but initially, every student with a device. We've been able to partner with a lot of companies and get free subscriptions to online libraries and online resources, but the ideal situation would be able to just purchase virtual field trips, more online libraries, math tools, whiteboards. One of the things I would love to do is get a document camera in the home of every teacher so that they can show examples. It's like the old time overhead, but in a digital vein. So I would love to just get more resources into the hands of teachers, more resources into the hands of our students, and just letting parents know that they're not alone in this, continuing to support parents,
Right.
just support and devices and resources and then some.
So you listed a lot that I've never even heard of. Virtual field trips. Like, what types of virtual field trips are students participating in these days?
So you can connect with a museum, for example, the Natural Museum of History, and have, just like we're doing here, Zoom your class into the hall where the dinosaurs reside. You can go anywhere in the world if you have a camera and a device. So we have the freebies that we've been taking advantage of right now, but there are so many things. I mean, we could take a trip to Europe and visit a class there. We could go to the pyramids. We could go so many places. When you're going through the freebies, you're limited in what you can do. But I would love to see virtual field trips without any boundaries. That would be amazing for our students.
I feel the gap getting wider as the conversation goes on. So, and when I talk about this gap and we talk about these access to these resources and funding, can you just tell us why the census would be important in terms of making sure that our communities get closer to having the same amount of resources as wealthier and more affluent school districts?
Yes. The gap is real and it is widening. I really believe that it's widening, and when you have a lack of resources, you have a lack of progress. So what happens is students in the more affluent districts, like I mentioned before, they don't have the same issues or concerns. They're not worried about where a meal may be coming from. They're not worried if they're going to be able to join the Google Classroom because the device isn't working or they don't have a device. The census helps us by making sure that every student in the district has a textbook, whether it be a virtual textbook or a handheld textbook. It provides for funding for, like I mentioned, the field trips. It provides for equipment. It provides for staffing. When you can't go outside of your budget to bring in consultants and additional resources, you're limited. Not saying the staff that we have are not amazing, but they're stretched because they're doing so much. When you are counted, you can get more funding for your district. It affects our grant monies. We are highly reliant on state aid and grants and donors. So when we're not counted, if we're undercounted, we're underfunded. So we'll never be able to catch up. It's almost like being on a treadmill and you're not going anywhere. You feel like you are, but you're not going anywhere because you can't catch up. And that gap just widens and widens. As you get tired on that treadmill, you slow down, so you get further behind. So if we're not counted, we're not going to be represented fairly. So we have to be counted.
And this whole idea of distance learning, I mean, most of us are introduced to it now, but it isn't a temporary thing. Do you foresee that aspects of what we're doing now is going to be the new normal in the future?
Absolutely. If we reopen schools, first of all, we would need to split schedules. We would need to decrease class size, which all leads to funding. You'd have to hire additional teachers, or, I mean, a class of 30, you would have to split it into 3 sessions to really socially distance the students safely. So the distance learning is real for us, because if we stay this way in the fall, we have to go 100% virtual. We have to go 100% teachers doing videos, teachers doing situations like this, FaceTime. Some districts have union pushback, but we'd have to really go forward with 100% live learning on Zoom, on Meets, on Canvas, on all of those apps that are out there. If we don't, our kids will continue to fall behind. Now, if we stay virtual, we also have to if we go back in person, excuse me, we have to think about that social emotional piece. We have to look at our kids and say, listen, we've all been through some trauma since March 13th, and now we're coming back together. We'd have to look at how students fared. We have so many kids we're hearing from that are having emotional issues in the home. Domestic violence, I'm hearing, is on the rise nationwide, with everybody being in close quarters. But we'd have to really look at social emotional. We'd have to assess the children. We need to see some kind of benchmark and assessment when they return, just to see if they stayed the same or if they've fallen further behind, which we fear is the possibility. So before we even think about academics, so a third grader would spend the first 4 weeks of school doing social emotional, some assessment, and then we'll think about third grade content. We have to see where they are. And that's for staff too. I mean, even us on here, the administrators, all the teachers and administrators that are on here, and I'm sure Ms. Armstrong will agree, teachers are struggling, and so are the parents. So we can only imagine what the little ones who really don't feel they have a voice are going through. So social emotional first before we can even think about academics in the fall.
Wow. So, with that said, I'm going to ask Ms. Armstrong, Ms. Regina Armstrong, who is the interim superintendent for the Hempstead Public Schools, just to piggyback on what Ms. Van Eycken is talking about. What types of things can parents do now to help prepare their children for, upliftment, the helping with the social emotional part of it, and then how can they help to fill in some of the learning gaps, right?
So good evening, everyone, and thank you, Michelle. You did an excellent job. I feel like I don't even have to say anything this evening.
Now we do.
Just kind of like nodding my head to a lot of what you were just saying. So for me, I feel like school districts have to provide supports for parents. What we have done without any warning, if we pretty much ask parents to become the second teacher. And most of them are just not equipped. Even if you're well educated, it doesn't mean that you're equipped to handle your child's schoolwork. We all talk about the new math, right? And it just looks so foreign to a lot of us who are older because we didn't do math that way. So I can teach you rote memory in terms of your multiplication, but now you want me to learn how to break things down and use all these different manipulatives in order to do the math. Well, I may not can do it that way as a parent, but I can show you the way I learned. So for me, it starts with just providing our parents with lots of workshops to teach them how to support their kids in this virtual environment. Then you also have parents who are just not familiar with the different platforms. So we've been trying to do a lot of videos for our parents, how-to videos, how to get online. We've had parent meetings, and actually our principals are kind of laughing. They said they get more parents on Zoom to PTA meetings than they did in person. We've had up to, believe it or not, 180 something parents who have joined the Zoom meeting. And that's wonderful because, when we have in-person PTO meetings, if you get 10 parents into an auditorium, you're lucky. So we're able to disseminate at this point more information to our parents, and they're saying some of the same things you just mentioned. They don't know what to do, so how do they help their child who seems to be shutting down? So we try to make things as interactive as possible. And one of the things that you have to learn sometimes you have to tell your child, okay, move away, go do this, and then come back to it, right? We're not really on a time schedule.
Right.
You can do work, your schoolwork all night long because they're up anyway. Most of them stay up playing video games. So why not just structure your day a little bit different, play a little video games, have a little fun, go back to your schoolwork.
Right.
I think parents need support in that to know it's okay. We've actually had parents who said they don't want to do online learning, just give me a packet. And we have to respect that because they can't handle the interaction online as well as trying to help their child. Mm-hmm. So they feel like they need something tangible. So we've done a lot with distributing packets to families, and if they weren't able to come pick it up, we've also mailed it out to their homes. So I think that's the biggest thing, supporting the parents in this learning environment. We are, besides the videos, we're also making certain, over the summertime, we have many different video presentations for parents, both in Spanish and English, because the majority of our population right now, parents do speak a language other than English. Right. So we recognize that that's even a big difference, right? So now how do you really teach those bilingual students English It's difficult enough in person, but now you're left with trying to do it virtually.
Right.
And then the parents can't necessarily help those students because they can't read the materials themselves. So there's a lot of training and preparation even before the next, before we get to September, in terms of what we need to do for our parents, and making sure that they are a little more equipped to help their children. But at the end of the day, schools should not expect parents to be able to do but so much, other than making sure that their assignments are being done and on time, and respond to the teachers in a timely manner.
Have you sought out any partnerships with any community-based organizations? Given the socioeconomic reality of our communities and what we're up against, have you thought that any community-based organizations may be helpful in supporting parents and families during this time?
We already have different partnerships that are out there that do support our families. Ms. Van Eyck mentioned about grant monies. So we have a lot of grant monies as well in the school district, and we use them to partner with different people. We actually have a mental health clinic in our middle school, and they've been servicing parents and students during this time. We have the Winthrop Hospital that's in a clinic that's in a high school. They're also working along with parents and students, reaching out to them, seeing where they are, and providing the help that they need, as well as other partners. We have the Hispanic Counseling Center, who's still in touch with families and providing assistance as needed. And then most importantly, we have our own staff, right? So we have plenty of social workers and school psychologists, and we have put together a list of resources for parents to refer to. And our social workers and psychologists also 2 times a week do check-ins with certain students who have been identified as having kind of meltdowns. We've had a lot of parent loss in our community. So we're trying to do all we can once the teacher identifies a child in crisis to make sure that we're staying in touch with that child.
Okay. So you mentioned populations of students and families where English is not their first language. Has there been any outreach to them to express the need for a complete count? Any census outreach, and what role has Hempstead School District played in that, if any?
So we know with that particular population, there's a fear factor in filling out the census. And unfortunately, our current president didn't help with that. So people think filling out the application means that you're going to be tracked and possibly put out of the country. So what we're doing is we're trying to do it from our bilingual office. We have our director, as well as her team, reaching out to parents when they have their parent meeting, beginning to talk to them about the importance of filling out that information, letting them know it's not a tracking system. It's really just to figure out who lives where, so we have a better count of how many people are in the village. So this way, when monies are disseminated, we get our fair share. And the more people who fill out, the better position we'll be in, because we're expecting to receive more of the monies. Right now, if you go back 10 years, the last time the census was done, the village of Hempstead looks very different than it did 10 years ago. And as you know, we have a lot of unaccompanied minors within our community. So we have to figure out a way to capture them. We'll be using some of our guidance counselors. In doing so, we have plenty of students who are 18 and over, so they can pretty much, and no parents, so they can pretty much fill out their own information based upon where they're staying, or encourage them to make sure the people that they're staying with will fill out the census and make sure they're included as being a part of that household. We have not done, in my opinion, enough. I've asked the building principals to make sure that every time they have a PTA meeting that they mention it. And also too, when we send home all of our end of year information, since the census is stretched through now into October, we're going to be sending out information to the parents so they can fill it out, or just have information as to how to go online and complete the survey as well. Right now, the last count about 2 weeks ago, we only had about 30% of the village who had completed the census information, and that's way too low.
Wow. So with that said, just having a candid conversation here. I went through the Uniondale Public Schools, and we have Michelle here representing Roosevelt, and you here representing Hempstead. Let's face it, the media hasn't necessarily been as fair in its reporting on how well our school district really does, right? And especially in reporting some of the great stories that come out of our schools. Yeah. What can community stakeholders do to actually support you, right? To make sure that what you're doing on a daily basis, really on the front lines with our children, what can the stakeholders do to ensure the success of the children of the district?
The first thing they
both of you, yeah.
I said the first thing they can do is stop adding to the story, right? The negative story that's out there. I just have an issue with people wanting to be a part of the problem and never the solution. So if you feel that there's a way we can do things a little bit better, my doors are always open. My emails is always working. You can get in touch with me. I just have an issue that everyone wants to tear down instead of build up. And what they don't get is that our students feel everything that's being said out there. And our students have pleaded with people to stop talking about their school district. We feel safe when we come to our schools. We don't have an issue with safety in our schools. People will make you believe that there's a big fighting going on between Blacks and Hispanics. That does not exist, but that's what the media put out there. People will have you believe we're only at a 37% graduation rate, but we're happy to say we're at 63%. Is it where we want it to be? Absolutely not. But we have reasons why. One, we don't kick students out because we believe in making sure we give students chances, right? Most school districts after 4 years, you're done. We'll keep our students for 5 years to 6 years, and even students who have met all their credit requirement, but not Regents requirement, we'll still keep them on the roll to make sure when the Regents roll around, they still have an opportunity to take those Regents and eventually get their high school diploma. If they don't have a basic diploma, how are they going to succeed in life, period? And definitely they can't do anything living in New York State without the diploma. So they can help by not adding to the negative stories as well as getting the positive information that's out there, because it's a lot. And one of the reasons why I don't like doing interviews, and even though they always are ready to stick a camera in front of my face, it's because as soon as I do the interview and I can share all of the positive things that's happening, they'll end this story with something negative, and that drives me crazy. I said, they just can't give us a break. They'll always go back to, oh, well, such and such. And I challenged anyone. I said, we're an open book. You can come check all the records that you want to. Just because those little acronyms or little adjectives that you say about the district or whatever may have been a thing of the past, is not the present. So.
Amen. Michelle, did you have any comments on that?
I would echo the sentiments of Ms. Armstrong to the letter. There are a lot of amazing things happening in the Hempstead School District, in the Roosevelt School District, Uniondale, Freeport, all of those districts with the Black and brown children that the press loves to talk negatively about. A lot of times we go to meetings and we hear all the struggles of a more affluent district might be, there's a few kids who are protesting the new rule about uniforms. Well, we have bigger issues, and I feel like the districts that look like us, we have to be more focused. We have to be more on that positive tone, because the outside noise tries to take over. There are amazing things happening in these districts, and I agree 100% with Ms. Armstrong. People can help by telling the good news. Stop being so fast to talk about what happened 10 years ago, 12 years ago when Roosevelt was taken over by the state. Well, the state is no longer there. The state did not, make any major changes or improvements. The people in the district worked hard. The people in the district continue to work hard. We continue to support students, and we need for people to continue to say the great things that are happening. Everybody has things that go wrong or considered negative, but that's not who we are. We have to focus more, and people can help us by focusing on the positive. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I truly challenge anyone to work in our school districts, right? We work with the student that we're given, right? And so if they come with challenges, we try to meet them with, where they are, right? So we have students, I said before, who come to our country. They're already overage and undercredited. We're not going to put them out because, one, they're here to learn English because that's the only way they're going to begin to survive in the country anyhow. So we take them in. We have what we call SIFE, that's students with interrupted formal education. Those students, we place them in special classes so they can get an opportunity just to learn English before we try to immerse them into the regular, their regular content area classes, even though they're taking them simultaneously. But how can you be successful passing an ELA Regents after 1 year being in the country and you barely speak the language and you definitely can't read it, and then the writing is so, let's not even talk about the writing. So those students, most of the time, they'll have everything completed, but they cannot pass the ELA Regents. And the state education department won't address it because, you know what, it just affects very few school districts on the island. So it'll be Hempstead and your Roosevelts and Brentwood if you go to Suffolk County. So if there's just a few school districts, well, no big deal, we're not going to change the rules. So we say you can't place so many mandates on school districts like ours, and it's not fair to continue to, I guess, rate us with other school districts because we're not serving the same population of students. So
good. So we talked about what stakeholders can do, and basically it's stop running with the narrative, right? But there's something else. We talked a lot about funding. We can start using that voice and that mouth to get people counted, get people filling out the census forms, raise that. You said there was a 30% response rate in the village of Hempstead.
Yes, a couple of weeks ago, yes.
A couple of weeks ago. So we need to get that raised. We have a school board election coming up in all the districts. June 9th is something that should be talked about. We have state representatives who are up for re-election, who we also need to advocate on our behalf to get additional funding in our districts, especially in the wake of what we're dealing with. There's a question from the, I'm going to say the audience here, but it's not the audience, right? It's a question from one of the participants. Ruth Franklin has asked, how do we address helping or assisting parents who do not speak English or read English, and those with younger children, to get them to understand why we need to complete the census, understand its impact, and is there a way to actually identify those parents through the schools so they can be targeted to complete the census?
So that's a whole lot of questions.
It is.
So there's no way to keep track in the school district as to who's completing the census and who's not. The only thing we can do as best as possible, encourage all parents to do so.
Right.
So how do we communicate? We have plenty of bilingual staff that's available even on a Zoom PTA. There's an interpreter on the Zoom PTA conferences to make sure that all parents are able to hear what's being said. The other piece to it, we have Proprio service. Proprio is a telephone service. So what ends up happening, if you're an English speaking person, you just make a phone call and there's whatever language that you need, and that person will come on the line and interpret for you. And it's more than just Spanish. They have Haitian Creole, Italian, Russian, Urdu, whatever you name. There's someone who will come on the line and help you to translate. So even as an English speaker to a Spanish person, and that is a great service. If I ever spent, that was a good spend of money on that particular service for our school district. And teachers are keeping track, right, of who needs what. And then they share that information with our bilingual office, as well as with our attendance office, to make sure that we are in contact with all parents and trying to provide for their needs. And we've done surveys for our parents to see in Spanish and English. And I know I say that we do have a small Haitian Creole population, but for the most part it's Spanish and English. And we get their feedback as to what their needs are. And based upon the feedback, then we try to determine our next steps.
So there's a third panelist tonight, Sanjay Mitchell, who is the Dean of College Counseling at Thurgood Marshall Academy in Washington, D.C. So we've talked a lot about all the grades, right, and distance learning. Sanjay, I want you to speak to, you deal with high schoolers, so I want you to speak to those parents. What types of insecurities are our students faced with as a result of the lack of resources during this time? And how do those insecurities play out for students at both ends of the spectrum, right? Talking about those who need a little help, and the average students, and then those high achievers, our honor students.
Yes, thank you, Cherise, and thank you to the panelists and for everyone who's spoken before. I really want to lean and start on what the last two panelists mentioned around the narrative, and particularly the narrative surrounding students of color and students of color when they're planning on going into the post-secondary space. It's always a deficit narrative. It's always a, you know, students of color don't go off to college, students of color and their families are not interested in going to college. And so what does that happen in terms of the scenario where we are right now with COVID and with the coronavirus and this lack of resources? So I can only imagine a student and a family who are hearing these narratives and now having such a huge disruption in their learning, thinking that those narratives are now true, when in a sense they're really not, because there's still a lot of supports that are being offered to students to ensure that they successfully finish high school and then successfully transition into a post-secondary space. But when we really look at some of those insecurities, a couple of things jump out to me, Sharice. One is the insecurities with family supports. Our colleague talk a lot about families where the parents or the guardian do not speak English. And so there's now a lot of insecurities in the parents' part as to how do I support my student when I don't even understand what the content is or what is being asked of me to support the student. Financial insecurities come about. One of the things that COVID really highlights is those who have and those who do not have.
It's not nutrient, it's nutriverse. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that highlights is families who have and families who don't have, because in order for you to participate in distance learning, there are certain things that you need to have that, and for some families, those things are luxury. The ability to have multiple laptops or a computer, the ability to have direct connectivity, those things are luxury and not necessarily items that some of our families are budgeting for. I lived in New York, so I know Hempstead and I know Roosevelt, and those communities look very similar to my community in Washington, D.C., where 1 in 10 of our population goes off to college, and a significant number of our students, around 88% of our students, are on free and reduced lunch, and around 85% of them are first-generation college students. So this idea of creating this insecurity around access to resources in order to do the work at home, that's also something that we have to consider as well. Families and students are now insecure about transitioning into the workforce. Is this something that I now have to do? Do I need to abandon school in order to support my family, in order to support my mom who was laid off, my dad who hasn't worked for a while? There's no money coming in. So now I have to think about, do I forego the school thing and go into the workforce so that way my family doesn't starve? And the biggest insecurity that I see is academic confidence. Can I do this work alone? Can I do this work outside of the schoolhouse? Can I do this work without the immediate resources of a teacher, a mentor, an advocate, someone inside of the school who continually pushes you and pushes the student and who are sometimes your biggest academic motivator? And so can I really continue to do this if I don't have those resources readily available to me at my fingertips? So this plays out in a number of different ways, particularly with our student and generally with our student population. So we see a lack of interest in doing schoolwork. And it's not that students don't want to do schoolwork, it's that the environment doesn't necessitate for them to do schoolwork. Home isn't where you do school. We say homework, but a number of us have after-school programs, community-based organizations where students go to get their work done. And there's this clear delineation between work that I do in school and work that I do at home. And so now I have to merge these two spaces into one, and it may not necessarily be conducive. I may be a talented student who's working hard, but I have siblings who are calling my name every 20 minutes. I have parents who are demanding things of me. I have a home that is a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment with multiple people in the house. Where do I find space to do this work? And so therefore, I just show a lack of interest in doing the work. The shift from academic and scholastic mindset to one of anxiety and immobility. Anxiety really prevents students from doing their best work. It prevents them from doing work at all. This is very anxious time. One of our panelists talked about students who are losing family members. If Roosevelt and Hempstead are anything like my school district, our families are very tight-knit. So it's not a case of this random family experiencing a loss. It is really a case of the entire school communities experiencing a loss. And so how do we deal with that for students who are worried about, could this be my family next? For our high achieving students, what does it feel like to not have that instant gratification from teachers? What does it feel like to feel yourself regressing in your academics because you don't have the ability to kind of go and get the immediate supports that you would generally? For our promising students, there are similar concerns, but the desire to give up and walk away is greater because, as I said, you know, that motivator, that academic intrinsic person who kind of pushes that button for you is really not necessarily there at your fingertips. And if you are a student who receives the services, special education services, IEP services, those are not being delivered in a way that you are comfortable with, or even delivered in a way that will really work for you well. And so now we have to think about, what are we losing in terms of this space? We can definitely set up the technology, but for our students, an insecurity around that academic confidence, that am I going to go to college, and what does that look like? Am I going to experience the kind of college rites of passage that, you know, so many of my peers before me, some family members, or that I've been working so hard towards the end of my 12th grade year, and now everything is moving into a new normal that is just so sudden. And so there's a lot of those particular insecurities and challenges that our students are facing. And I would suspect that it's students across the entire spectrum that are facing it, but it's particularly heightened for students who lack the resources, both socioeconomically and emotional and home life support, to make sure that this transition works well for them.
Right, excellent. So with that said, Andre and Sanjay, I forgot to tell the group, and I don't think Kira mentioned it because she may not have known, but Sanjay is a former admissions counselor for the University of Albany, where he and I both attended school and graduated from. But Sanjay, for our best and our brightest, right? The ones who communities like Uniondale, Hempstead, and Roosevelt, the students that we're looking to go off to college and actually come back and invest in our communities. Because one of the things that we experience is brain drain, right? Our best and our brightest, they go off, they don't come back, and then we have the same circle of people in our communities, and it's the same thing over, and we're expecting different results. Lesser funding, you have parents who aren't really connected to what's going on because the top 25% of the class has stayed in Atlanta, stayed in Charlotte, right? Stayed in or around Hampton, Albany, or moved to DC.
Oh, okay.
What impact has distance learning had on our AP students and those scheduled to take SATs?
Sure, and that's such an incredibly important question, as I've been, and you said to keep it real, Sharice, I've been on the necks of College Board around how they are not paying attention to equity concerns when it comes to the shift of the AP exam being online.
All right, I have to stop you. Tell us what, I know Michelle Van Eyck and Regina Armstrong know what the College Board is, right? But for our participants who are watching, what is the College Board, and why do our parents need to know about this entity?
Sure. So the College Board is essentially the gatekeeper of post-secondary access for all students globally, and not just students here in the United States, but students across the world. So the College Board has fashioned itself as the organization that is set up to administer, measure, as well as determine from standardized exams as early as your AP exams, advanced placement exams, to your PSAT, your pre-SAT exams, your SAT exam, your AccuPlacer when you get ready to transition into a junior college space and determine your class level, your CLEP exams for students who are looking for alternative path. All of those particular post-secondary transitionary exams are all being administered by the College Board. The ACT being, of course, the counter to the College Board, but again, similar scenario. But College Board has a wider footprint in terms of that post-secondary access than the ACT does. And so when the coronavirus hit, I wrote a letter to David Coleman. David Coleman is the CEO of the College Board, just expressing how moving to an online AP exam will exacerbate some of the issues that distance learning is talking about. Lack of access to technology, lack of access for connectivity. Students are not in the mindset to deal with an AP exam in this pandemic. And then you've shortened the exam from a 3-hour sitting into a 45-minute online space with a lot of parameters around it that aren't necessarily conducive to student learning. And so what does that mean for that student who's thinking about going off to college, who may have taken 5 to 6 AP courses in a year, 4 to 5, or whatever the case is? Now you're looking at the anxiety of having to do these tests and really thinking whether or not the work that you have done in your junior year and in your senior year for these AP exams, sophomore year in some cases, is this going to be valuable for college? Are colleges going to look at these scores and say, we are going to take them with fidelity because we believe they are likened to you sitting down for that 3-hour exam? And so now I'm panicked and anxious about taking the SAT, but I want to shift the narrative a little bit and shift the lens a little bit for our families to really think about how we can ripen this opportunity for students, particularly for our students in marginalized communities. A lot of schools are becoming test optional, meaning they're no longer looking at your SAT scores or your ACT scores. They're going solely based on the work that you have done inside of the classroom. And so that is incredibly helpful if you lack the resources to take the test, if you're not in the mindset to do an online SAT exam, or you're not thinking that you can perform your best because of whatever reasons. Now there are schools who are hearing you and hearing that, and hearing our call to say, let's look at other ways to determine how a student is college ready and college eligible outside of taking these tests. Many colleges will forgive and understand the end of the junior year. Students, this is not your fault. And for our parents, please impress upon your children that this is not their fault. So colleges will take into account whatever the district decides is their plan for your promotion to senior year. Whatever the districts decide is your plan for promotion to graduation, colleges will look at that and take that for face value for what it is. This idea that I'm not able to complete community service, so I'm not able to do a lot of extracurricular activities and all of those things, colleges will understand that there's been a major disruption. So you will not be penalized for not having those things. What I'm liking now about where we are, and I'm choosing to find the rays of sunshine in our bleak times right now, is the opportunities for a lot of our families to really explore a number of colleges without the added expense of traveling, without the added expense of thinking, how can I see this college space, or how can I visit or view or have interface with college representatives if I don't have the resources to leave my neighborhood or to leave the state, etc. A number of colleges are really creating robust online experiences that allow for students to get a really nice, rich information and experience about the college, even from a virtual platform. So just thinking around for our families who are very familiar with, colleges that are around Long Island area, your Hofstra, your St. John's, your Adelphi, your Stony Brooks, etc. Now is an opportunity to be explored to colleges like colleges that change lives, your small liberal arts colleges across the country, or your more selective schools that our students are just sometimes undermatched with. So now they can be exposed to those schools that will end up giving them money, which we know is a huge barrier to ensuring that students enroll and thrive throughout the next 4 years that they're there. So aside from the psychological impact of not participating in traditional rites of passage movements, taking the SAT, there's a form of rites of passage with that. There's a form of rites of passage with, having your junior prom going into your senior year and all of those things. We just need to remind our students that there's opportunities for you to venture outside of what would have been restrictive given our normal circumstances. And so now we have the space to kind of rewrite some of those things and really take advantage of some of the oppressive barriers that have been broken down by COVID, and that have been exposed by COVID. So let's figure out how we use that to our advantage.
Okay. So Sanjay, you've listened to both Michelle and Regina and what they talked about, some of the challenges that they have as administrators in their respective school districts. But you kind of come from the perspective of what are we going to take from this and how are we going to move forward? How are we going to get our kids to the next step, right? The next level. There's school board elections coming up on June 9th here in New York State. What questions are important for families to ask all the candidates about how districts are won, right? Devising plans for census outreach, because you heard both Michelle and Regina discuss the need for funding, right? Access to technology is obviously going to be a problem going forward. Remote learning and college readiness, right? What should parents be asking these candidates, and what's the role of these candidates and lay people on school boards?
Sure. Excellent question. So we don't want to boil the ocean, but we also don't want to keep throwing band-aids in the ocean either. So we know that this became challenging for our families, not because of the school's inability to respond, but really because of the external resources the school cannot always address. Such as working conditions, family economics, family mental health state. And so one of the things I would really want to push our school board leaders, and we are doing the same thing here in the district, is to think outside of the narrative of the school and figure out how do you support and lend your voice to areas that will support the well-being of not just the student, but the family. So we've seen that distance learning can work in some cases. So can the school board consider modifying traditional school schedule and calendars to include distance and alternative pathways for students? And what does that look like, right? Do we really need our students to be in seat 180 hours? Do we need them to be in school every day? Or are there spaces where we can figure out how do we make this work for families and give them alternative options, so that way they can be successful within their own right? I would definitely want to push our school board leaders to really articulate that connectivity is a public utility. Access to Wi-Fi, access to broadband speeds, to all of these things should now be a public utility like your light bill, your water bill, etc. Because what COVID taught us is that this, moving to this space, the ones who have it left and went off and are doing their own thing. The ones who don't have it are still trying to scramble to get online. I don't know about my colleagues, but I know that for us, we still have about 25% of our students that are no shows online. No work turn-in, nothing is happening. And we've been trying to call and we've been trying to reach out, but we know that there's shame around the fact that you have to come and say, I don't have internet access. There are families who have bills that are piling up for connectivity, whether it's Verizon, whether it's Time Warner, and some of those companies are not relaxing those rules in order for the families to get online. So how can we push our school board leaders to make that, to make connectivity a public utility? How are we supporting our most vulnerable families? So what types of programmings are we implementing, or school board leaders are willing to support to meet the basic needs of students and families? Can we ensure that not only are we having our students becoming academically ready and prepared to engage in this market, in this job market, but how are we supporting our families to do the same? How are we encouraging our families to get, a GED or get any kind of training program in order to be able to be financially solvent in order to support the families moving forward? And for school board leaders, how are we partnering with local colleges and community colleges to accelerate enrichment opportunities? We have dual enrollment in some places, but is that enough? And who are we targeting for dual enrollment? Can we figure out how to make these partnerships work so that way we know that there are disparities for our students, and we can't keep running on the fact that there are disparities and hoping that, continuing to kick that ball down the road will ultimately, lead to some miraculous conversion of some sort. But if we have the ability right now, and what COVID is saying to us is that this is a time for us to think outside of the box and to think outside of brick and mortar. And how can we really create an expansive enrichment opportunity for students, whether they are at the top 25 of the class or the bottom 25 of the class, because in any way, they all need to be supported. And how can we use and leverage our leadership with our elected officials to make this happen for our children?
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a question from one of our participants. Evelyn Jackson is asking, and this question is actually for both Regina and Michelle, right? So we talked about resources. She would like to know what specific ways is the Hempstead and Roosevelt School District, how have you been making a way out of no way? What are some of the things you've been doing to compensate for a lack of resources or shortfalls during this time?
Well, I can say that we've sought out additional grant opportunities. We have an amazing director of grants, and she's actually Dr. Michelle Rivers, a member of our chapter as well. She seeks out donors. She looks for partnerships that Sanjay mentioned with local organizations.
Okay.
We just, as you said, make a way out of no way. We do the best we can with what we have, but we also, reach out and extend our hand to local organizations, Island Harvest that provides foods, different organizations that we know would be willing to help us out. So we just have to be creative. We have to be willing to go and say, hey, we need this. There's no pride here. We need this, and we'd like for you to consider helping us. We do have a generous donor that's been very generous to us recently, but we seek out grants. We rely heavily on grant funding, so we just look for more grants. Dr. Rivers has a way of finding a grant. If it's out there, she finds it and applies for it. So we've been fortunate with that.
Nice. And Ms. Armstrong?
So we too have I think that was the Sprint, the 1000 by Sprint T-Mobile that gave our high school those devices. And then we had a second grant for the hotspots as well that we were granted. What we did is that once school closed, we utilized our grant funding in a different way. We were informed by the state education department that whatever you kind of were planning on using your grants for, if you can do an amendment or whatever and change up. So let's just say for my pre-K grant, I know now that my partner for pre-K can't utilize their funds because they can't be in school. So we were allowed to take some of those fundings and purchase devices for our pre-K students. So we took $50,000 from our universal pre-K grant in order to purchase iPads for pre-K. Then we looked at our just regular general funds to see exactly how much money was in there. And we were able to get 600 more devices for students. And now we're looking, and we, like Roosevelt, we empty all of our laptop carts that we have in our schools to make sure students have devices. We do have a whole group of students without devices. So in the upcoming budget, we have placed monies to ensure by September, every student has one-to-one. We don't want to do the sharing thing either because it's our expectation that students will use their devices even during the summertime to make sure there's no summer lag. So making a way out of no way, I think that's kind of what we live on in Hempstead. We don't have people so much who are willing to support us. Still feeding into the past narrative that we don't know what to do with monies, right. Even, it's just going to fall into a bottomless pit or whatever the comments that they're saying out there. So we're learning to use what we have in terms of grants and general funds to make sure our students get what they need. So we're repurposing monies basically to ensure the students get what they need.
Excellent. So I'm going to be looking for some final comments here, specifically about, look, so these are our kids. They're not Hempstead kids, Roosevelt kids, Unionville kids, Westbury kids. They're our kids. So can you give us some final comments? One, what can we do? What can the stakeholders do? What should we be doing, right, to make sure that there's adequate funding in all the districts? How do we change the narrative and flip the narrative? What should we be doing on social media? What phone calls and texts should we be sending out, right? And then with this school board election coming up, how should people exercise their vote? What questions should we all be asking? Would you just please share some final comments surrounding those issues with everyone today? And I'll start with you, Sanjay.
All right. So thank you. Again, I think this is an important conversation. And Sharice, I love that framing that these aren't Hempstead kids or Baldwin kids, and I'll pull the plug, DC students. These are our students across the entire spectrum, across the entire nation, because unfortunately for communities of color and for students of color, they're feeling the pinch the same way, no matter what their zip codes are. Especially if you are in a underrepresented and underserved area. One of the things that we've been doing and that I've tried to do is I've really tried to give our students the space to name what is happening with them right now. I try not to overtalk them or give them a narrative to say or whatever it is. I give them the space to say, hey, how are you feeling? What is happening? What's going on? And with giving them the space to do that, they've actually come up with their own strategies and own plans to not just weather this interruption that we have, but also what they want to do once everything is done, what they want to do to change the system. We did a full-on census drive in our school, where we have it on our website. We send it in every one of our weekly newsletter. We have students who are doing issues to action work, and part of their issues to action work is actually getting their neighbors and everybody around to complete the census and to register to vote and all of those particular pieces. So what we can do is we can continue to empower the people who will have the voice next. My voice is weak. it's getting too much, and so now I want to inspire the next round of young folks who are going to be coming up, because these issues are directly affecting them. Decisions that are being made today they're going to bear the brunt of it in another couple of years. Changing the narrative, particularly around post-secondary access and what that means. I hate I hate the language, not everybody needs to go to college, and I really don't like it because folks don't know how to frame it very well. Sure, not everyone needs to go to college, but everyone needs to have the opportunity to be great. Everyone needs the opportunity to be able to do whatever it is that they would like to do in order to take care of themselves and ultimately their families. So doing some campaigning around using our alumni to really talk about what they have done with their college experience, using folks in the community who are looked upon as far as, mentors or advisors or spiritual healers or whatever, to really talk about what the post-secondary experience, particularly college, meant for them, and how that has given them the space to kind of weather such a disruption like COVID, or even in 2008 when we had the stock market crash. And what we really need to be harping on our school board leaders is really a conversation around access and equity. And what does access and equity look like? And not just the buzzword of, we want to be considerate of access and equity. No, what exactly are you doing that is access and that is dismantling inequities? What are you doing to disrupt oppressive systems that keep students down? What are you doing to ensure that students walk away with a rich experience that is equal to, if not better than, their more wealthier counterparts? Because research shows that once you give students, regardless of their backgrounds, once you give them the opportunity to aspire, to reach, to take away the barriers and give them all the resources, they will excel no matter where they start. So if there's not conversation around, these are discrete things that we are doing to encourage access and to dismantle inequities and oppressive systems, then you won't have my vote.
Amen. Amen. All right, Michelle.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. The thing that I think we need to think about when we speak to candidates for the board, we need them to know that there are a lot of things that the families are dealing with at home, and they need to be able to tell the community members and the families, they need to be able to reassure them that they have their best interest at heart, first of all. And secondly, this COVID has limited a lot of the things we can do, but it has not completely, stagnated us. And we still can speak to the community, let them know we care about them, not we, but the candidates. Let the community know they care, that they are willing to make sure that schools are safe, schools are ready to be reopened if that is the way of the government. If we're going virtual, that they will ensure that students have the resources that they need, they have the support that they need. They need to just let the people know that they are there for them, and they understand, because they too are home dealing with the pandemic, but they need to let them know extra double down. I don't know if that makes any sense, but they need to reassure parents that, I'm the best candidate. I can ensure that your child will be safe if we return. I will ensure that your child will have everything that they need if we don't return. And they have to come from a place where parents feel that they really are sincere and feel that they really care about what they're struggling with, the deaths that they've been dealing with, the lack of resources, the long lines at food banks. All of these things have to be considered, and they need to let the community know that they are with them, they understand, and that they have their best interest at heart. And they'll have to figure out a creative way to do it virtually and with social distancing in mind and all the CDC guidelines, et cetera. So they're going to have to dig a little deeper and work a little harder to gain that confidence. And I think that's key.
Thank you for that. And then we'll end with Ms. Armstrong. And can you just remind us what the stakeholders need to do? How can we help? How can we support you?
I need everyone to be a part of the solution and not the problem. And one of the things in this era, even with school board elections, don't make empty promises, right? So we can't guarantee our parents, if we reopen schools, that their students are going to be safe. What we should be just articulating to parents that safety is our first priority. So therefore, if we cannot ensure that their children are going to be safe going back to school in September, then we can't open our schools, right? We also should be making more of an effort to reach out to our officials in Albany to let them know, listen, we get that you have to make cuts for budgets, but you should not be touching the minority school districts. You have the power and the authority, right, to move monies the way you choose to move your monies. And so we're telling you, stop moving the monies away from our school districts, because in essence, what you're doing is you're widening the gap, right? So we talked about that. We're not going to really know how much our students have lost until we can figure out some sort of online assessment, whether it's we started during the summer or we come back in the fall, to really test to see where the skill gaps are and to begin to put a plan in action to do so. However, funding is key. And for me, as part of our budget presentation, we put up at the very, the second to the last slide, the phone numbers and contact information of our local politicians to say, listen, if you're having an issue or whatever, let's reach out to Senator Kevin Thomas. Let's reach out to Assemblywoman Darling and some others, just to let them know where we are and what our needs are. But even beyond them, I believe in, let's get right to the governor's office to let him know. We have our public relations firm that working very hard and overtime, writing letters, and we're going to go beyond the governor's office. And for candidates who are coming on board, I suggest you find out who the people are, find out what the needs, and begin to be a part of that process, because that's what we really need. We need the funding in order to make sure that our kids get what they rightfully deserve. My budget is probably going into next school year almost $10 million less than what Great Neck's budget is, and they have half of the student population that they have, right? So when you look at a community that's very wealthy and you look at our community, we're totally dependent upon state aid. They may only get $100,000 or $200,000 in state aid. So if the governor cuts their funds by 20%, that's no big deal. If they cut my funding by 20% going into next school year, that's $20-something million. Right. How do we even have schools? So it begins now for all of us to work together to save our schools. And I'm even willing to write to good old Betty DeVos, because she wants to say that, she's going to pull all this money back into public education. And we really need to start holding people accountable. They just can't say things and then don't do it. But the only way we can do it is to let our voices be heard, and collectively we come together. We began a campaign because emails. We can do email because we all have internet access. The USPS is still running, right? They
Right,
can
yeah.
deliver those letters. So there's a lot of things that we can do in this virtual world if we just take advantage of it. But it really will take us all working together, candidates, those who are elected to the board, currently on the board, and all of our officials to ensure that our school districts get exactly what they deserve. Because there are a lot of people run and they make empty promises. And I'm not just talking about the school board trustees at all, because I do believe they all run with honest intent and they do it the best they can once they get on the board. But elected officials, you know, they make us promises, they get into office, and then we don't see anything. They're making good on those promises. So we have to start holding people more accountable.
Right.
And if you don't do what you say, then no, you don't have my vote again the next time.
Absolutely. And with holding them accountable and sending those letters and making those calls, right? We all need to fill out the census and be counted. It's kind of like RSVPing for dinner. You're talking about a budget, right? Which you compared Hempstead's budget to Great Neck's budget. If you have a budget because the census said that you're estimated to have a school, you know, a district with 8,000 kids, and then 12,000 show up in September. Well, guess what? The meal just got smaller.
Exactly.
Right? So we ask for RSVPs to a wedding for a reason. If I send out RSVPs to 75 people and they respond, 75 are coming, but 150 at the door, the chicken is going to get split. Right?
Yeah.
So, and this is what's happening in our district. So I challenge everyone that's participated today, that's listened today, to do these things. First thing, easy. Get on your cell phone, laptop, make a phone call, or fill out the paperwork, right? Get counted, fill out the census. And then if we have representatives who aren't advocating, do what Ms. Armstrong just said. Make that phone call, send that letter, but start getting active, participating, because it doesn't get better from here. The gap is actually widening. You heard at the beginning of this, you heard Michelle Van Eycken talk about virtuals, field trips, right? These are things that our kids are missing out on. Our kids can only dream of the pyramids, but you have other kids that are looking at them on their computer, right? This is something that we want to make sure, if we're going to invest in our communities, if we're going to see them flourish, it's going to start with the children that we're educating today. And that education has to happen at home and in the communities and not just in the school district. I'm going to close with that. I'm going to ask Kira Bryant, who is the chair of the Social Action Committee, if she'd like to come and make any final comments.
I'd just like to thank the panelists for joining us. Information was so valuable, so important. I see some different comments going on about, you know, we all would like some chicken, and filling in that census is the only way to make the government truly split up that chicken evenly, because, you know, to where Great Neck, well, let's take it to vegetables now, to where Great Neck was getting broccoli, Hempstead, Westbury, Roosevelt getting ketchup, okay? You know, when they try to make that argument that ketchup is a vegetable, you know, the disparities are so, it's just too much. It's just too much. We've been operating on 60% of what our communities need, based on only having a 60% count for the census for the state. So, you know, if we could imagine if for the past 10 years, we had that additional 40% in funding, the kids would already have their computers. The Wi-Fi might not need to be a utility. It might just be something, the towers coming right up out of the school building and the whole community is getting covered. You know, one thing we've done as a committee and our wonderful Since the 2020 task force for the chapter, we have asked the teachers to make the census and completing the census an assignment.
Yes.
Make it a competition amongst your students in the class to see who can get the most number of families on the block to complete it. You know, we don't want you going outside too much these days, but there's ways to get the word out and to communicate. And just with all obstacles that you guys have discussed this evening, it is just so crucial that that funding be there. Also, we need to do more with civics and teaching the students what it truly means to be a citizen of the community. Not, oh, you were born here, you're not born here. What is your responsibility to your community? And remaining engaged in some of our most basic political processes is something that I think we definitely need to do a better job communicating to the kids. And I know that's not on you guys, that's on the funding, because there's so much that gets cut, you know, when that's lacking. So we will be there on the front line trying to push to make sure that our communities, our school districts get all that they need. We will change that narrative that everybody can make a significant contribution to society, whether they have a doctorate or they have a certificate in mechanics from BOCES. You know, they can support themselves and be positive contributing members to society. And just thank you to everybody who has joined us over the past 4 weeks.
Yeah.
This was a wonderful conclusion to our symposium. Most movements historically have not gained their traction until the children were empowered. So you guys are the ones who have your pulse on the children, and we will, you know, continue to breathe life into that. So be on the lookout for upcoming weeks, all guests, for further webinars and fill out the census. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Seeing you, Regina.
Yes, good seeing you too, Michelle.
Nice meeting you, Sanjay.
Nice meeting you
Take care,
both.
everyone. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for allowing me to be a part of this
Thank you,
experience.
NASA alumni.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Absolutely.